My meatballs are better than your grandma's. Oh my God, I can't talk to save my life. I set out to make the most perfect Italian-American meatball. I dreamed of meatballs. I tested meatballs for hours and days and weeks. And I ended up with what I think is the most perfect meatball. It is juicy, it is tender, and it's so damn flavorful, your taste buds are gonna flee your mouth. So the meat I have here, I have ground beef and I have ground pork. A lot of meatball recipes, you will also see ground veal. You can make this and add ground veal too. I didn't do it because veal is a little bit more expensive, so I'm just keeping this a little bit more economical. Try to get your ground meat with a pretty high fat percentage if you can. The fat is one of the keys to a juicy meatball. If you get really lean ground meat, it's just gonna end up dry. With meatballs, there's almost always some kind of filler, which is called the panade, and it's typically made from bread. That's what the word panade comes from, P-A-N, pan, bread. It isn't just to stretch the meat. There's more reason to it than that. A good panade will add tenderness and even moisture to your meat mixture. Some people use dried breadcrumbs. I've done tests side by side and I really don't like the effect that the dried breadcrumbs have. They make a meatball that's much more dense and not nearly as moist as a panade made from fresh bread. So how do we do that? Well, first I'll cut the crust off, cut into cubes. In goes our bread. For the panade, we have to soak the bread in some kind of liquid to soften it and basically turn it into like a bready paste. And a lot of recipes will have you do it with just something really basic like milk, which is totally fine, and you can do that even in my recipe. But I try to sneak a little bit of extra flavor in there by using buttermilk instead. A very subtle push forward of the flavor with that buttermilk note. So squish it around with my hand. Does that qualify as ASMR?
No, that noise is gross.
I'm gonna let it sit though and just let it kind of hydrate. I've revealed my secret ingredient number 1, my buttermilk panade. Secret ingredient number 2, and this is really optional. I sneak some chicken stock into the meatballs, and I do it by gelling it first. And I just sprinkle it all over the surface of this chicken stock. This is a lot of gelatin for this quantity of liquid, and that's on purpose. When it chills, I want it to solidify into a block, something I can mince up. It's gotta soak in, then I'm just gonna heat this in the microwave. That'll help dissolve the gelatin. Then I'll chill it, and when it's cold, it'll set like a block, and then I can chop it up. I can work it into my meatball mixture, and it won't melt until the meatballs are cooked. Oh look, it's done. I have this stock. Oh God, just kidding. It's solid. It's like out. I kind of wish like they made curtains like this and they would like kind of jiggle in the breeze. There is one caveat to using the chicken stock in this recipe, which is that because it introduces so much juiciness to the meatballs, it does impede browning a little bit. If getting really, really, really dark, crispy browned meatballs is your goal, you might want to leave it out. But I want the juiciness. That's why I do it. Recipe calls for a medium onion. This is definitely a large onion. So this is not the kind of thing, a meatball is not the kind of thing where you have to be that precise. An extra little bit of onion or a little less here and there is not gonna change things too much. I'll mince some garlic. It's a healthy amount of garlic because Italian-American meatball should have some garlic, right? Right? This is one of those recipes where I really just do it by feel, what seems to be about right for the quantity of meat that we're working with. So I'm eyeballing it, and you can too. And the flavorings I'm using in these meatballs are really traditional. It's onion, garlic, parsley. Very classic Italian-American style meatball in terms of the flavors. In terms of some of the weird stuff I do, like this gelled stock, that's not so traditional. Now I'm just chopping because it's fun. The role of the pancetta here is really to add fat, so I want a nice fatty cut of it if I can. So I just want to show you, I have a piece of pancetta here that is room temperature. The fat has some give to it. And if you want to mince something finely that's fatty like this, doing it when it's room temperature is really hard. Having a sharp knife helps a lot, but let's just give this a try. I'm going to cut a slice off. As I cut it more and more, it gets harder and harder to work with. I don't even have a solid base to get my fingers on. It's moving around. It makes me nervous for my fingers. But if you cool it down enough and even almost partially freeze it, that makes it a lot easier to cut. And look how nice and clean that is compared to this stuff before. Da 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 da. All right, I got everything prepped here. It looks a little bit like a mess. It is a little bit of a mess, but I'm gonna get it cleaned up and we're gonna mix our meatballs together in 1, 2, 3. I think I'm too greasy. I got too much pork fat. My fingers are just sliding.
Here.
Ready? Everything is prepped at this point. It is time to bring it all together. So I have my panade here. It's been soaking for a while. I've got my onion, garlic, and parsley. Pancetta goes in. 4 egg yolks, one of which has broken, but that's totally fine. They're all gonna break in a minute anyway. Cheese, all the cheese goes in. Make it rain. Ah. There's so much stuff in meatballs, it's not meat. Ground fennel, in we go. Dried oregano, salt, fresh ground black pepper. Here we go. We'll just keep going until we think it's enough. That's a lot of pepper, that's good. So now here we finally are at our stand mixer. So I'm gonna start off, before I add my meat, just blending everything together in here. I have a very specific texture in mind for my meatballs. I want them to be tender, and I don't want them to be crumbly, but I want them to maintain some level of looseness with the ground meat texture. I don't want them tight like a sausage. Well, what does that mean? What it means is that if I take all the meat, combine it with my seasonings, and just work it until it's really well mixed, I'm starting to create a sausage texture because I'm binding those meat proteins and fat as I'm mixing it. It's a little bit too aggressive. And you're gonna end up with a meatball that's more springy and bouncy. A little bit of that is good, but too much, for me, is a problem. So what I do is I add a portion of the 2 meats, like 1/3 of each, and I mix that in really well, just to help distribute the flavorings as best as I possibly can. And then I'm gonna take the bowl out of the mixer and I'll incorporate the rest of the meat by hand so that I also maintain some of that ground meat texture so it doesn't become too tight and too emulsified in the mixer. Time to make some meatballs. You can go however big you want. I'd make kind of nice, I don't know, handball sized meatballs. Throw it around. It's time to cook the meatballs. I like to brown them first. I like to broil them because the broiler is easy, relatively clean, and large meatballs like this are kind of hard to brown in a pan unless you put a ton of oil and kind of shallow fry them, which you could do, although with the amount of liquid I've packed into these meatballs, it might get explosive. Into the broiler they go, and we're just gonna let them brown a bit. Ooh. Now we wait. All right, so these meatballs have lightly browned on top. I didn't take them too far. If I wanted to, I could turn them, brown them more. But I'm happy with this, and then I'm gonna poach as many as I can fit in this little pot of tomato sauce, and they'll finish cooking in there. These are my meatballs. Welcome to my meatballs. A little more cheese. A little more cheese. More cheese. That's just obscene. These meatballs are juicy and tender, and I have loaded them with as much flavor as can possibly be packed into just 2 pounds of ground meat. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna continue to eat meatballs until I fall over.